1.
Hello. Welcome
Hi.
to Reaper Miniatures. I am Anne, and I am Sidney in the chat. So I am the camera operator for Reaper Errant. So you guys may have seen me running around there on our stream, on your stream, and I'm nervous.
I think that's normal.
I think so too. But yeah, I'm a clinical psychologist as well. So you've seen me with Nightheart Gaming, and you might have seen me behind the camera with Reaper Errant. And today I'm bringing you a mental health and gaming from hobbies to therapy panel. I have questions that we are definitely going to get to from Discord as well as chat. But I wanted to start by introducing ourselves. So I actually met Adam 6 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, when you brought Game to Grow to PAX South. And it wasn't Game to Grow at that time. It was the Wheelhouse Workshop. Right? Yes. Is that 6 years ago?
You know, time is a meaningless void right now, so I'm not really sure how long ago that was. Feels like last year was 6 years ago, so I'm not sure.
Yes. At the same time, that's where I met Reaper Miniatures, if you can believe that. And that's when I started to paint. So if you'd like to introduce yourself and what you do.
Sure. My name is Adam Davis. I am a founder and executive director of Game to Grow. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We're based in the greater Seattle area, but we are most well known for our therapeutic social skills groups, serving kids, teens, and adolescents worldwide using Dungeons and Dragons.
Awesome. And then Elizabeth, I actually met you 2 years ago at PAX South as well, when you guys were there promoting Critical Core, maybe.
Yeah, so I was not officially with Game to Grow at that time. So my name is Dr. Elizabeth Kilmer. I'm also a clinical psychologist. I'm the director of education and training with Game to Grow. And I have been running therapeutic D&D games for, I really need to count this up. I think it's 3 or 4 years now. I started running them while I was still in grad school at a children's advocacy center, then shifted to working within the VA, the Veterans Administration healthcare system. Did that for a couple of years and then got to come on full-time with Game to Grow. So I have run therapeutic D&D groups with ages 8 to 86. And I love doing it. And now I get to teach other people how to do it so they don't have to reinvent the wheel, which is great.
And I've taken both of your training because you guys train together. I'm up to the level 2 of the mental health. So I also stream painting, which is where I met Geekette.
Hello.
Hello.
So I am Geekette. I stream miniature painting. I am a TakeThis.org ambassador that promotes mental health in gaming. In fact, they are most well known for their AFK rooms at conventions such as PAX that provides a safe space to take a breath, drink some water before you go back out onto the floor. That can be overwhelming and very loud. My primary motivation is to create a safe space for people to come and find respite and kind of recenter themselves, because I know that the world is kind of crazy right now, and there just needs to be more safe spaces in the world.
And Marvin, I actually met you. I haven't met you, but a year ago I reached out to you because I know you're local to me, and I was going to come see or we were going to talk about therapeutic gaming. So if you could introduce yourself.
Well, a lot certainly happened in the last year since you reached out that kept that from happening. But I'm happy to be back. I was fortunate last week. I'm a licensed professional counselor in the Dallas area where I provide individual and group therapy. I've been providing tabletop skills group training for tabletop skills groups for about 2 years now, and I too am completing the training under Dr. Kilmer. So super excited about that.
And also, I will say that you were part of the mental health panel 6 months ago at ReaperCon virtual. Yes, yes, which is a well done panel. I found it to be very, I don't know, just accepting and soothing, and just I could tell that the community really loved it. So I wanted to talk. So we want to talk today about mental health and gaming, but as far as mental health and gaming, it doesn't just include the actual tabletop and role-playing game, but all the aspects of tabletops and role-playing game, which would be character creation, campaigns, arts and miniatures, terrain, role-playing, the mutual storytelling, that all of this is often characterized as a hobby. And I put quotes on it because I'm not the biggest fan of the word hobby, because I think it carries a lot more meaning than a hobby means. I think of hobby as often said with like a sneer in your face. What's your hobby? What's your interest? Rather like what our passion is. I think a lot of people are very passionate about it. Now that's my bias, but that's kind of why one of the things I want to talk about is like hobby, therapeutic, therapy. And what I wanted to find a little bit about was kind of what your history is personally with role-playing games. And we can go around, we can jump in, we can...
So for me, tabletop RPGs have always been about spending time with friends and forming bonds and community. Having a structure where you have something to look forward to, and it's with something you enjoy, and you can get out of your own head and into a different reality for a little while. So you're not having to think about your day-to-day and your normal stressors. You are literally transported into this fantastical world where you are teaming up with other people, you're teaming up with your friends, and forming that community and those bonds that are so important.
How long? Now I know you're a GM.
I do GM. I'm also a player. So it's just a matter of the group. Mostly I run and play Eberron, D&D. I tend to run Eberron setting in D&D.
Okay, and how long have you been playing? And GMing?
Since college years. GMing has been relatively new. I've always been afraid of it. It's one of those things that once you finally get your feet wet, you realize it's actually a lot of fun. It's kind of like anything in life where it's more public, or like you're making yourself a little bit vulnerable. Like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm trying anyway. But if you have a good support, like friends and stuff who are like, yeah, no, this was fun, it gives you the courage to keep trying and keep learning. And it's really empowering, actually, to finally get your feet wet and take that dive and realize it's not actually that bad.
Are there skills that you've brought from your life into your player or DM experience?
Actually, it's kind of the other way around, where what I learn and experience and practice while being in the game, while playing or running a game, kind of gives me the confidence and the practice of things to implement in real life. Like, I have experience now. Literally, I have experience, not just leveling up experience in the fantasy world. I am able to practice those terrifying situations, I'm able to practice being in these high stress or hilarious moments so that I can have a more balanced perspective on real life and not be as terrified by things I'm not familiar with.
I absolutely love that you said that, because you're a great segue into what you said is what and the reason that a lot of our professionals do the therapeutic role playing game, right? So I don't know
Yeah.
if anyone else would like to talk a bit about experiences as well. With
I can
personal,
speak to
more
my
about
own.
where you are, where you came from.
I can speak to my own experience getting started as a player. I am from Texas originally, where some of the concerns around the satanic panic lasted a lot longer into my youth than they did for other folks who grew up around different parts of the country. So I sort of had my Dungeons and Dragons at the time experience was sort of shrouded in secrecy because I had to keep it a secret from some people in my community. So I originally was learned to play at Boy Scout camp, where the Scout master came over and shook our tent and said, "Stop doing that devil stuff in there." So we, of course, we just doubled down and wanted to learn even more about the game and more about the rules and everything. But it wasn't really until middle school age that I got really into it. When I was actually reading a Dragonlance book at the time, Dragons of Autumn Twilight, it was probably 95 or something like that. And then in the after school club that I was in, where we could be supervised to do our homework, I looked up and there was another person there who was also reading a Dragonlance book, and we just clicked. And he was like, "You should come over to my house. I'm gathering a fellowship." So we got together and started playing some Dungeons and Dragons. That was 3rd edition at the time. I think maybe 2nd edition. I don't remember. Because we didn't pay that much attention to the rules anyway. We were mostly, loving the stories that we were creating and the time that was ours. And as a kid in middle school, I was definitely a recipient of peer victimization, which we know now is a pervasive problem for middle school age. And so I realized that the characters I could become and be and see myself as in the games that I was playing were aspirational characters, versions of myself that were better than myself, that had less struggles than I had. And that was a really useful thing for me at that time to internalize some of the heroic nature of those characters and give myself a boost to my confidence and my resolve to deal with the situations that I had going on in my life. And that is 100% a thing we see at Game to Grow groups all the time. A lot of middle school is sort of the bell curve where a lot of our youth are situated in their lifespan when they come to us. And a lot of them struggle with similar things. Peer victimization is a like I said, a pervasive problem in bullying. We now have an awareness of quite how endemic this problem is. But a lot of the kids come to us, they make aspirational characters, versions of themselves that can escape into a fantasy world and be a hero, be a respected war hero that people look up to. And that is a thing that I think is certainly my experience as a young person who is needing some escape and needing some shifting and exploration of my identity. And I think that is 100% a thing we see all the time. I think that's a really unique thing that we can get out of a game. Dungeons and Dragons or otherwise, any collaborative role-playing story game, we can have this opportunity to internalize bits and pieces from our characters, not only escaping into a fantasy world, but bringing bits and pieces of that back to us.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the skills that you brought to the tabletop as well?
You mean when I was a middle schooler?
No, just
I could draw.
nowadays.
I was really
because
good at drawing the
I know a
Dragonlance
bit
logo
more about.
on my binder.
Talk a bit about, so you've been a player since since childhood, a DM,
yes,
or game
and no.
master.
I actually played Dungeons and Dragons and other games through middle school, and then took a long break. And I rediscovered it. I got into theater, so I transitioned from tabletop role-playing games and stories and all those things, and I transitioned that into a study of and a mildly professional life as an actor, and then transitioned that into being a drama teacher and transitioned that into drama therapy. And that's how I was reintroduced back into Dungeons and Dragons, was this connection with the fact that tabletop role-playing games are a collaborative role-play experience where we can create scenes and setups that create analogous experiences to our real life, which is a lot of the same things I studied and utilized as a drama therapy student and drama therapy practitioner. I mentioned in the last training that I actually studied popular political theater in South Africa for how they used intentional scene work to address situations during apartheid in apartheid South Africa. And a lot of those same principles are leveraged and utilized in role-playing games. It's not just mental health, it's community change, it's educational work. There's so much we can do with this platform.
Thank you.
So I'd actually like to jump in next, because there are a couple of things that Geekette and Adam touched on that feel very similar to some of my experiences. So I had heard of D&D. I also grew up in Texas. I had heard of D&D, but hadn't, like, that was like deep geek. I was like, I'm not that level of geek. I read a ton of fantasy books growing up. I'm not sure if anybody else had this experience, but books were my friends, especially in middle school. It was hard. I didn't always fit in. I was loud and too excited and too excitable and too much for a lot of people. And so I read a lot of books, and I loved reading, and I volunteered at the library, and I read everything I get my hands on. And I did a lot of tech theater in high school and college. And then in grad school, my now husband actually introduced me to D&D as a way to be like, yeah, you're not gonna like me. I'm way too geeky. Look at all this cool geek stuff I have, like these Pokemon posters and this Dark Soul figurine. And also I play D&D, and I was like, I don't really know what that is. And we started a regular group with a bunch of other friends from grad school where we'd get together on Sundays and play for like 6 hours. And it was awesome. It was a great way to get to build community. It was also a space where I got to be excited and a little impulsive. And it was celebrated, right? It was something that could be part of my character, where it was very much an asset. It wasn't just super annoying. And it was this really incredible experience. And then Jared went to a PAX South where he saw Adam and Adam talk about Wheelhouse Workshop and brought it back to grad school. And we went, oh my gosh, like this would be great. So we had a lot of training in acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a type of cognitive behavioral therapy. And we're like, well, this fits really well. Like, a lot of what this is about is, connecting with your values and engaging in this committed action, and like in engaging in real relationships with other human beings. And D&D is an amazing way to facilitate that. And luckily we had several supportive facilitators. Jared started his groups at the VA, and I started them at a children's advocacy center. But before we started those groups, I'd been a player for a while, but I'd never DM'd. And I was like, well, I obviously have to DM before I start running therapeutic groups. Like, that would be wildly inappropriate to just jump in. And the first game I DM'd was for my parents, because they were going to love me no matter what happened. And they were willing to try this out. And my dad was really excited because there were books of rules that he could learn and read. My dad's a big Axis and Allies player. And my mom was like, this sounds cool because you're telling me that there's books, but I don't have to read any of them. Like, I can just show up. And I was like, yeah. And I did a horrible job my first time DMing. I was really awkward and really uncomfortable. And I tried to run a module because I thought that would work better for me. And it doesn't. I mostly do homebrew now. I have learned from that experience. Modules are amazing, but they don't fit with my GM style very well. But my parents were like, this was fun. You did a good job. And I was like, you're being nice. Thank you. But that was kind of this experience I needed to try it out, right? And then I was able to go on and run more groups with friends and get more comfortable. But I do think that like that first time is going to feel awkward and uncomfortable for most people, I assume. And so going in with the expectation that like this is just my kind of trial run, and going in with people that are still going to like you afterwards, which is probably most of your friends, is a really great way to get started. And now I do a bunch more voices, which Adam has pushed me into doing. I sang
You gotta
in
practice
a group
it somehow.
Yeah.
Marvin, you ready?
Sure. Yeah. I could copy and paste a lot of what everyone has said thus far. I too grew up a nerdy kid in middle school, and I can safely say that tabletop role-playing games saved my life growing up, because I was in a very dark place when one of my acquaintances in high school, he was in high school, I was in middle school, reached out and said, hey, a few of us from the comic book shop are getting together and want to play this game called Big Eye, Small Mouth, and I thought you might be interested. So that's where I got started, is with that system, and then Werewolf Apocalypse, and then finally with an online D&D 3rd edition group. And I stopped playing for a while and then started back up in college. So that was
it's just weird.
What was that?
I go into a corner and produce.
Oh, that's okay. That's one of the CEOs chatting.
And I started GMing in middle school for my girlfriend and her friends. So yeah. I see it as a major expression of art for me. I'm not an incredibly artistic person, but this does allow me to be creative. And it does allow me to stretch my boundaries around art, and I've found that I really enjoy making maps on Incarnate, and have gotten into painting miniatures a little bit, but I need to watch some of your videos. And
Geekette as well, I would recommend.
oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Okay.
It's been fun learning.
I got started doing, I think I had a group at UNT going about the same time that Dr. Kilmer did. That was a fun coincidence. Unfortunately, we never got to play together, but let's see. I made some notes based off of your points. You asked about the skills earlier that we got to bring in. Not so much earlier on, but since I became a therapist, I've gotten some good feedback from my friends in my current group, who's kind of my primary support system at this point. But they've given me some feedback that the skills that I developed as a therapist allow me to deepen the experience for them as players, to really draw out what their characters' interests are and motivations.
Yeah. Okay. I realized I didn't really introduce. Oh, I kind of introduced myself, but I also I've just been focusing on you all. So I started playing a similar experience. Actually, I have a similar, but not. I am not from Texas. I'm from California. So California is very open, very open. It's just an open place. So to me, as I was growing up, I had heard about D&D and I wanted to play it super bad, but it was like I didn't know anybody. Wasn't introduced to it. I'd meet people and then I'd hear like that they played it, but it was only for guys, and it was like their poker group, right? And so I was like, oh man, like I want to play, and I just wanted to play, and I didn't start playing until about 10 years ago, 11 years ago. Started with 3.5 and then jumped over to 5E. And we had been to PAX South and had seen the Wheelhouse Workshop guys, Game to Grow. And I was like, we could do this. Let's do this. We could do this. We could co-DM this. But I need to get experience DMing to be able to do this. And so then thankfully 5e was around because 3.5 was way too difficult for me to DM. But 5e, I could get in there and I started to DM and I had a group. And I had a group where a couple months in, we lost one of our players. He passed away. And he happened to be the son of one of our players and the brother-in-law and the sibling. So very quick, I had to use my therapeutic skills to be able to bring this to honor his loss and unite our group. And that group actually now feels like a family. A lot of them play on Maximum Maidens and in Dungeons and Dramaturgy, which is Nightheart Gaming's our performance groups. I don't know. Our groups. And I have noticed as well, like Marvin said, that I feel like it's unconscious, but I will unconsciously tap into what they're personally struggling with. And that's a little scary because I want to make it very conscious because that can feel unsafe for our players. So I am currently in the Game to Grow, as I said before, and working on starting up a virtual group and doing that virtually. For me, I will also add that I have attention deficit disorder. I was diagnosed as a child, and I'm the inattentive type, so it's hard for me to stay focused. I have notes and all kinds of things here to keep me focused, which is why I have this like super agenda to keep me on task. But one thing that I know is that for me, that's why miniatures are essential. Miniatures, terrain, a tabletop, it helps to keep me focused. And if I don't have that, as well as fake notes, which I call them fake notes because if I read them, they make no sense, but it makes me stay attentive. It helps keeps me focused. And personally, I also like that I can create these characters. I have characters that I've used to process some trauma that I've had. I've had characters that I have used to play at what it would be like to not be impulsive. And all different types of characters that I think I've used in my life. And then I also will say that some of the skills that I bring as a DM are psychological, but they are also, oddly, I was a Zumba instructor for 10 years. So when it comes to streaming, I know how to hold the energy and hold the room. And so that is another thing that I will say. I think we have kind of hit a lot of you guys did awesome. We hit like the 3 of the main topics here. So is there anything you guys want to comment about each other and what that was a very long introduction before we move on to another topic?
I wanted to plug and point out that I first learned about Therapeutic Dungeons and Dragons listening to the Psychology in Seattle podcast with the Adams, Adam Davis and Adam Johns. So that really sparked my interest, and y'all are the reason why my group is off the ground.
That is so awesome. That the host of that podcast, Kirk Honda, is actually the Game to Grow board president. So that's fantastic. I'll pass that on to him.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about hobby versus passion versus therapeutic versus therapy. And I'm just going to kind of throw that out there and just let's have a conversation about it and try to dive deep into what that means. And I also want to say that it also involves art, also involves that storytelling, the drama, the role play, like all these type of things. And at least I think of that as a giant category for what therapy or what role playing is about. Art as well, drawings. You've all heard my opinion a bit about it, is that it's more of a passion. I think it's therapeutic. And then, of course, there's the therapy form of it, which we haven't really gotten into. And I think a lot of people might be interested in hearing about that. But
I can address some of the differences that I see. To me, a hobby is something that you do to fill your time. You usually like doing it. Passion is something that you're driven to do, that you maybe couldn't imagine living without doing. And for me, tabletop is certainly a passion, and it's therapeutic, which means healing. At least for me, in both my personal and my professional games. But therapy itself is therapy should be therapeutic. It's goal oriented and, at least for me, client centered, and it involves a lot more background work than the typical game.
can you tell me about that background work a little?
Doing an assessment with each participant in the group to understand what their needs are, what they'd like to address, coming up with ways of measuring that to, show that progress is being made, and finding ways to incorporate ways of practicing those skills in the game itself.
To kind of add to what Marvin's saying about some of the differences, I think when we're thinking about intentionally therapeutic or psychotherapy in gaming, some of what we're looking at is the intentional goal setting around kind of mental health related goals, as well as the relationship between the therapist and the rest of the players. So if I am a GM for a social game, oftentimes there's an expectation, not that my players get to know what's happening behind the screen any more than in a therapeutic game, but in a social game, I'm playing with my friends. So there's more of a free exchange of information in terms of what you know about me and what I didn't know about my players. When we're talking about a therapeutic relationship, that relationship is different. It's very important, but it's different from a friendship in a couple of key ways that are part of what makes it powerful. You're not going to know as much personal information about your therapist. You're not going to have as much insight into some of their experiences as you would with a friend, because when you are in a therapy relationship, the focus of that space is really on the individual who's there for therapy or the group that's there for therapy. The therapist is there to facilitate that growth and that change. And that doesn't mean that the therapist doesn't ever learn anything or they don't gain anything from that experience. I have learned so much from clients, but the relationship is intentionally different because of the goals that are there. And so even though as a therapeutic GM, you're absolutely going to engage and play is very important with your players, there's not the same expectation for that free exchange of personal information and experiences. And part of what that translates into is if I'm playing a social game, I might make decisions based on what is best for me in the moment or the group as a whole, or what I just think would be fun. Whereas when I'm DMing a therapeutic game, I'm going to be making decisions based on what's best for the players, the group itself, or what would be fun for the whole group or other individuals. I'm less of a focus in that space.
So what I'm hearing is that you have to define boundaries based on the situation that you find yourself in.
Absolutely. And the boundaries are going to be different for different social groups as well. But we're going to see kind of more common boundaries set for therapeutic social skills groups as well as psychotherapy or counseling groups.
This is something that comes up a lot, this question about what is the difference between a therapeutic group and a therapy group, and how is therapeutic Dungeons and Dragons or tabletop role playing games different than a good group session when people play together. And I think one of the ways Adam Johns likes to explain this that I've totally co-opted is the difference between a really good conversation with a close friend and a really good therapy conversation with your therapist. Both can have immense benefits to your life. There's no one who will tell you that it's a bad thing to have a really good conversation with a close friend that you trust, that you know cares about you and you care about them. That's an immensely therapeutic thing. But that is distinctly different from a conversation you have with your therapist who is trained with that clear delineation of roles and responsibilities and focus and goals, like Marvin said. So I think that looking at what a therapeutic game is versus a therapy game are very useful to use that analogy of the difference between a good conversation and a therapy conversation to build on what everyone else was saying. And then to go back what you said, Anne, about a hobby. So I think of a hobby as something that you can pick up and put down at will. But I think of the community and almost the tribe of tabletop role playing gamers. I think of it more as a lifestyle. It's not something that is as easy to pick up and put down. It's a motivating factor. It's people who are really into sports. I have a lot of family members who are really into the San Antonio Spurs, and they would have the same thing. They would say, this is not a hobby. This is a lifestyle. I wear my black and silver on game days. We gather in groups to yell in synchronicity with each other. This is not just something that I do. I can pick up and put down. This is a flag that I carry. And I think people who are enthusiastic and committed to the lifestyle of tabletop role-playing games have the same phenomenon. They gather in ritualized groups, engaging in performances of collaboration and communication in something towards a common goal. And I think it's a very similar kind of lifestyle as someone who's interested in sporting events or those kinds of hobbies.
Absolutely. I do want to add the caveat that if you're thinking about maybe wanting to get into D&D just a little bit, but you think you'd prefer it more on the hobby side than the lifestyle, that's also okay. You don't have to fully immerse yourself. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to purchase anything at all to be able to play a game and see if you like it. And maybe you're someone who plays a game like once every 3 months, or you play through a one shot or a short adventure and then you take a break for 6 years. And that's also okay. It doesn't make you any less of a player.
You don't have to get the matching tattoos right away.
No, not right away. Not right away.
And as you said with your parents, they came at it from a very different perspective. One of them was like, yes, books, I want to deep dive into this. Your mom was like, oh, I don't have to read anything. I just have to show up. That's great. So I think that's like a good example of the difference that you can have. You can have the same. What I would like to mention about hobby and the term hobby is that I see a hobby as a potential gateway. Like a hobby is something that sparks interest, and then whether or not you decide to pursue something more is up to the individual. So you can choose how deep into the waters you go based on the hobby, and it opens a lot of doors to communities that you didn't necessarily even know existed. There are worlds within worlds, and you can choose which one you fit into most. And it all starts with that spark of a hobby and choosing to grow from there.
We've been talking about to the game, but there's so much involved with the game. There's the storytelling elements, there's the art, there's the miniatures, and how that might relate to the game or the gateway.
I think it's a lot of different ways to get to be involved in something that's really special, right? And everybody is going to have different preferences, just like with other hobbies. To go back to Adam's sports reference, which I don't know about enough about sports, I should not be making this, but like there are people who want to watch every single game, and then there are people who want to understand all of the stats, and then there's the people who want to go back and like really understand, like the logistics of different plays and what people should be doing, and like more on like the color commentary side. And no one would say like, oh, well, you can only be engaged in sports if you care about sports this way. Some people do, and those people are jerks. It's the same kind of thing with D&D. There are some people that their passion is way more focused on writing stories, creating characters, creating backstories, painting miniatures than it is with the play. And the play is a great way to supplement the primary hobby, which might be around painting miniatures or creating characters or creating stories and modules. And so any way that you want to engage in this game is really, really valuable. When I am doing this work with clients, oftentimes when someone is feeling really depressed or down or anxious, or they're dealing with trauma or they're dealing with substance use, we lose access to a lot of the things that we used to care about because our brain has a harder time enjoying things. We stop enjoying the things that we used to. We have a hard time picking up new things. So one of the things I love about D&D is there are so many different components and pieces. And so if D&D is a way to get you in the door, like playing the game is a way to get you in the door because you're doing something with other people, it can be a great way to help you have motivation to unlock some old hobbies or passions that you might have been engaged in around journaling or storytelling or art. I have a lot of my players make art or draw comics or write songs based on some of the stories that we've engaged in. And that's then this kind of extra hobby or this extra passion that's still tied back into D&D and connects with their values in their community.
Mm-hmm.
I think, to build off of your comment, it also like encourages creativity. A lot of people are like, oh, I'm not artistic, or oh, I'm not that creative, or something of that nature. And by getting into D&D and then going into creative endeavors like you're talking about, you're realizing that you can bring something to life. Like, you start off with just D&D, it's like, oh, this is a thing that's completely different from my normal life. And it encourages you to branch out into those other creative habits, and you're not thinking about, oh, I'm not good enough, or oh, I'm scared of being ridiculed for trying something, because you have this supportive group that you found that you're creating this world with and is accepting and encourages you, and it builds that self-confidence and that sense of self.
I love that we're seeing in the chat people kind of talking about how their hobbies and passions have really connected. And I'm assuming I'm allowed to do this, but this is a Twitch chat that I'm looking at. I wanted to highlight Hobbies for Happiness was asking if in like engaging in acquiring a hobby, if it's a good step for someone who might have challenges accessing mental health care. There are so many reasons people have challenges accessing mental health care. Those can be internal and external. They can be structural and systemic. And absolutely, engaging in a hobby, engaging in things that you care about and you find enjoyment in is going to be a positive step towards mental health care. If you don't have access to therapy, engaging in a hobby or engaging in a community isn't a replacement for therapy, but it's absolutely a great way to support your mental health while you're working through whatever barriers are getting between you and being able to access that mental health care.
I'm going to also say that I think therapy is very valuable. Obviously, I'm a psychologist, but I also think there's many ways to recovery, mental health recovery, addiction recovery, homelessness. Like, there's just a lot of different ways to recovery, and you know, gaming can be a way to recovery, art can be a way to recovery, drama can be a way to recovery. It doesn't just have to be therapy. And so that idea of it being a start. Like if art's your start, art's your start. And if art's your jam, that's it. And if poetry is your thing, I have met poets who their poetry is their therapy. And they've come to me and said, do I need this? And we've worked through it and said, well, maybe you don't really need therapy because you're getting it from your community. You're getting it from your work. You're getting it from other people's work. And that is speaking to you. So I think there's many different ways where we can be healed.
I think that ties back to Adam's comment about the difference between therapeutic and therapy. And so you're able to find those therapeutic connections if you can't find therapy necessarily.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes.
I think one of the things that this connects to is this idea that you were saying could get around this access to something. You know, there's something we're tapping into when we're playing these types of games, connecting to art in whatever way, that sort of spark that reminds us that there's a bounty of experiences we can have. And a lot of the connection points that I have made into this as someone who is no longer a stage performer is the connection to my performance, the connection to story and character and narrative. And I view all of my games cinematically. I'll even use as a game master, the camera fades in and closes in on your character's face. What is the facial expression they are making before we cut to black and end our session? Like I'm taking on my director hat. Like I said, I used to be a drama teacher and I would direct youth in plays, and it's so much of the same sort of language and skill set that I can use as a game master now, which is a continuation of that passion that I had for the art form of things that I was echoing through my mind as you were talking, Geekette, was around this feeling of capacity we have to make a change. It feels like we have some agency, some self-efficacy in these games that we may not necessarily feel in our real lives, that our presence actually matters, that people value the kinds of contributions we can have. And then we can see it happen because the game master will describe literally what our actions do when we roll dice. And then we say, I want to do this. The game master says, go ahead and roll the dice. We roll the dice. They describe what happens. That is a feeling of cause and effect that is sometimes really hard to access in the world that we live in. I want to smash that door down, roll the dice. The door is now smashed. Wow, that's a really fun fact that I just contributed to the world. The other thing that I think is really special and therapeutic about gathering around with people right now is, especially in the context of what the last year has been to so many of us, is this access to a community in the scope of different circles of community that we might have. You know, we have our most intimate connections, we have our secondary connections, and then we have our sort of identity connections. And I think that in the context of a tabletop role-playing game, we're getting a little bit of the first two kind of circles that we don't have a lot of access to now. That first intimate circle is people who you trust, that you might even trust with your life. And now in the context of a tabletop role-playing game, we largely are trusting our fellowship with our life. We're going into this dungeon together. We're fighting that big, bad, evil creature together, and I trust you with my life. And if I don't show up for one session, there might be negative consequences for your lives. That is an amazing access to something we don't get a lot in our daily life anyway, because our social capital has declined so much in the last several decades. But also that secondary circle of just your cohort, your community that you have access to, with a lot of us having spent so much time in social isolation this last year, being able to connect even on that level, to be able to see faces who might smile at you, who aren't necessarily your employer, you know, or your clients or whatever, is a really valuable thing also. To see colleagues, to look at a screen and see people smiling and co-creating something together, I think is a really powerful therapeutic experience. And then that third circle of community is this identity circle where I say, I am a member of this community. And also, this provides us, like I said earlier, some people are lifestyle gamers and some people are hobby gamers, but either way, you have access to this identity now that says, I'm a gamer. I am someone who plays and enjoys tabletop role playing games, and I speak the language. That's how we create culture and community, is through shared language. So now when I say, oof, I failed my saving throw today, I see nodding heads and everyone says, okay, everyone knows that I'm struggling today and I'm using the language of my community, and I'm being validated by the reception of that from other people. So I think the context of tabletop role-playing games right now and why it's so important and so therapeutic for so many people is absolutely this access to self-advocacy and self-efficacy that we have through meaningful contributions to our stories we're co-creating, but then also the fact that I can just be with people, and in a time that it's so hard to be with people, and be with people in a rich and inviting way instead of a transactional way, which so much of our online spaces have been reduced to. My input is just to try to get some sort of reaction that is either to get my, to serve my boss's sauces, or to get something out of it. That's like I have a video chat with my accountant, or a video chat with the people who I need to extract something from, instead of people who authentically enrich my life.
So there's a few things that I want to touch on that you brought up. First of all, I love that you used the word agency, because that's something that a lot of people feel like they don't have for one situation or another. And finding any small shred of agency is insanely important. And I don't think it's given enough credit in life. Another thing that you brought up was talking with people and building the community and the therapeutic side of it. I think and like trusting someone with your life, it could be that you start off with strangers or acquaintances that you start this group off with, and it allows you to create these bonds of trust in the group. And you end up to the point where you feel like you actually can trust these people with your life, because they have proven time and again that they are there for you to support you, both in and out of the play session there around the table. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was to touch upon is you said having a language such as, oh, I failed my saving throw today. Something that I've taken to saying, because I have an invisible illness, I have lupus. Something that I can say is, I don't have spell slots today, or I only have cantrips today, or something of that nature, so people can better understand that I don't necessarily have the energy to be able to do something. And it's like, oh, I can comprehend that, and I know that tomorrow is going to be a completely different set of spell slots. And that seems to be a very helpful analogy for people.
I love that the use of spell slot in place of spoon for spoon theory, because it also hits the point that some things take more, and you might not have the spell slots for the things that take more, but you could do more of the smaller things.
Mm-hmm.
I also like that spell slots allows, like, you can cast a lower level spell at a higher level like with a higher level spell slot, but you can't like go the reverse.
Right.
Yeah, I use that one a lot. It's really helpful. Can I
Super
pull in another
helpful
question?
analogy.
Well, I was going to
Yeah.
ask, I was going to bring up something
Mhm.
that I thought, I know there's been things being brought up about social anxiety, agoraphobia, OCD, and trauma. And maybe to talk about kind of some of those categories. I know it's a
Yeah.
category, which is, but just kind of like how that comes up in therapy, but also I think there's something else. There's several things I'd like to hit on, but let's just, so there's the therapy and the categories, but it is the question of, as a DM, how do you support your players when you don't have the background and knowledge that per se we do? with these issues, and how do you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think, and this kind of ties into the question that Yoda Taco asked about, like, what are some of the risks and pitfalls for using hobby for self-help? And I think it's important to think about, right? Like there may be topics or issues that I'm really going to talk about with my therapist, but I wouldn't necessarily talk about with just a friend. Or I wouldn't talk about in the same level or expect the same kind of support. But it's also important that, like, I have ADHD. That doesn't disappear when I leave therapy, right? That continues to impact my entire life. If you are depressed, if you have OCD, if you are autistic, if you have PTSD, then that doesn't you don't get to leave that at the door when you go to places. So hobbies and D&D can absolutely be really helpful. Now, I think when we're thinking about engaging in D&D and what's okay to do with friends, it's important to think about it's important to think about consent. So a lot of my players are particularly impulsive, and it's nice because I get to, like, try less hard to be less impulsive in this game because it's a safe space for me to do that. But if that impulsivity was creating an uncomfortable space for the rest of the players in that game, I'd want them to be able to talk to me about it. And that's something that I need to be able to manage. Maybe I need to pull that back, or maybe this impulsive of a character isn't a good fit for this game. What it's not okay to do is say, you know what, I want to work through this trauma that I've experienced, and I'm not going to tell anybody in my group that that's what I'm doing. And I'm going to design this character that is, like, really close to myself. And I know that this campaign is going to hit on several triggers for me. And I'm just going to kind of see what happens, right? You're setting yourself up and everybody else in that group for a really uncomfortable, potentially dangerous situation. So it's okay that your depression doesn't get left at the door when you come in and play. And it's okay for you to want to play a really empowering character, or get to play, like, your middle school self that now gets to feel great instead of, rejected. But think about where your own coping skills are, right? If something is particularly triggering for you, are you able to kind of manage that in a way that is healthy and safe? Do the other players at your table know that, like, oh, spiders are a really big no-no for me right now. I'd really rather not have them come up in the game. Or do the people around the table know that spiders are really hard and I'm trying to get more comfortable with spiders, so I'd like to have them in this game if that's okay? So some of that has to do around having those open and honest conversations with the people around your table and knowing where your own limits and boundaries are.
I'm going to pop in the consent and gaming into the chat, because that does a very good job. We do have resources and Discord in the mental health panel section of Discord for Reaper Virtual Expo, which everybody can go and check, and I will be updating the resources at the end as more comes into play. But that's a link to that idea of, it's a form that you create to tag into some of the things that might upset you and you don't want, or some things that you may want. Geekette?
Yes. So two things that I've found helpful is, like Dr. Kilmer said, having those honest conversations from the get-go, saying, I want to avoid this, or I want to explore this topic, things like that. You also have to realize that sometimes things are just going to come up in the middle of the session and you have to pivot. Something that perhaps even the person didn't realize was a trigger, or that they've never told anyone about. And then it's just like knowing that you can trust other people with that knowledge, or even you yourself being willing to just accept it, don't make a big deal of it, just pivot, move on, so that the person doesn't feel cornered or overwhelmed or having to be defensive. And also, sometimes people are just afraid of saying something. And that's where the X card system comes in handy, where you have, like, the red, the yellow, or the green cards. Usually it's the yellow and red that get used the most. But having that where people can just kind of touch it, say, hey, I don't feel comfortable talking about it. I am having trouble dealing with this in any form or fashion. I can't even verbalize it. And having tools like that available is very helpful. In fact, the X card system of being able to just say, hey, no, stop, is useful in a lot of situations. Like, I've even implemented it in my chat for stream, where it's like, hey, if something is going on that you do not want to talk about, you can just say it in chat real quick, like, hey, this is a red flag, this is a red card for me. And it's like, okay, let's completely change the topic. That's not a problem. So it's even useful in it's, again, that's something that you can bring from the tabletop into real life, that has that vocabulary, like Adam said, that you can use and facilitate. Words are hard. Used to facilitate real life.
I also put in a link to Xcard in the chat as well.
Awesome.
Xcard system. Yeah. You guys are making
And I
this
know
so
there've been
easy.
a couple of questions coming up around like, well, how do I know if this is okay or if it's not good for me, or I'm not sure if this is a safe thing for me to engage in. If you're having a lot of those questions, it might be a good time to check in with a mental health professional. Obviously, you want to check in with a mental health professional that is like gaming positive. Unfortunately, not all of them are. Game to Grow offers individual counseling, and also Take This has a list of clinicians, licensed clinicians in a bunch of different states, which can be a great kind of starting place for resources. But it's okay to go in and say like, hey, I have noticed that this is coming up in my gaming sessions, and I'm not sure if this is something that is actually helpful for me or if it's something that is harmful.
Good rule of thumb: if you're not a therapist, don't do therapy.
Yes.
Just in general. And that's just a good sort of golden rule around this. And also, if you are, don't make your game master into your therapist either. So there's a two-way street here. As a game master, don't subject your players to what may be capital T therapy, not just therapeutic, good friend kind of conversation. And the same thing is true as a player. If you know your goal is to unpack and deal with and process some deep-seated something that you're wanting to work on, don't do that with your friendly game master. And the other important thing about being a game master that I think is really useful and important here is that it's not just you and the player that you're needing to navigate. You're also cultivating a cohort of people. So if someone does want to work on, like Elizabeth said, I'm wanting to build on my comfort level around spiders. That's not a bad thing to do in the context of a safe and supportive group. However, if the game master and that player have a really strong connection, but that player doesn't with their other teammates, then that still might not be a great spot. So the game master has to make the decision not only based on their relationship with their player, but also what the cohort looks like. And in the context of a drop-in group at a game store or a drop-in virtual group, probably, once again, best not to do that unless the group itself can be safe and supportive. I had a group recently where one of my players had recently experienced a seizure. And that can be, problematic, very traumatic for that individual. And they wanted to have their player have a seizure in the game. And they wanted to do that for an unspecified reason to me. And I know my players, and this group of players have been playing together for years. And so when that was introduced into the game, the concept was about bringing the group together to have some self-disclosure around medical concerns that had not been disclosed. So there's a little bit of self-revelation that's happening there. And that is so important that the cohort is able to provide that safety net, that response that is appropriate to, thanks for letting me know about this. You hadn't disclosed it and I care about you. And also, what do you need? How can I help? Can we help and serve you? This is all happening through the process of character projection, but it's happening analogous to the real life experience where the player can disclose something to the group, and then the group can hold space for it and process that with that degree of externalization that allows you to take it with you without feeling too emotionally responsive. The same thing happens when players in groups might disclose that they are not straight, or that they don't identify with the gender identity that others assumed they identified with. These are things that can happen. And as a game master, you're not just dealing with that one player, you're dealing with the cohort. And it's important that the game master navigates that as well and has some context for the group, not just the individual.
Absolutely.
I did actually. Sorry.
All three of us.
Go ahead. I can bring my question up later.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Dr. Kilmer, did you want to say something as well?
Yeah, I'll jump in really quick. So part of that process of consent, like Adam mentioned, is what do we want this game to look like? Right? There might be some games with some friends where exploring a fear of spiders is totally fine. And there may be other times where people are like, you know what? I'm feeling exhausted because we're in month 12 of a pandemic and I just want a fun, lighthearted game where nothing bad happens. Both of those games are totally fine and appropriate. You just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page about the kind of game that you're playing. And if you're kind of wondering like, well, how do I create like a safe space for my players, and I want to think about this from a community standpoint, we don't just have mental health professional trainings. We also have trainings for educators and community members. So if you're looking for more kind of concrete tools around consent and around growth through gaming, that's a great place to start. We actually have one in 2 weeks.
So I also want to build off of something Adam said about being able to explore things like with the player who had seizures. I think, and having everyone on the same page about that, making sure everyone's comfortable with it so that they can even learn the skills that they need for dealing with someone who's in the middle of a seizure. Because if you don't have experience with it, when you are first faced with that in the wild, you don't know what to do. You start to go into that panic mode, that fight, flight, or freeze mode. So like experiencing that in game, if everyone's on board, is really helpful for informing in whenever you're, if you ever experience that in real life. Another thing is that I see this problem a lot where people don't know how to establish boundaries. And I think that when it comes to like a lot of things that we're talking about with being able to explore these things, or players wanting to help or try and play the role of a therapist without knowing what they're doing, not having that professional training, part of that is boundaries need to be negotiated. And it's difficult to do that in our culture because we're not trained how to do that. A lot of us want to be there and be available and fix and help. So I guess I'll defer this question to you guys is, what are some healthy boundaries that you would recommend to the common everyday lay folk? The non-trained,
Excellent.
Not professionals.
Excellent.
Go ahead.
Okay. No, you go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say one of the rules of thumb that I've offered people is, as far as boundary setting is for what may be okay to address in a friendly game versus a therapeutic versus therapy game would be, on a scale of 0 to 10, how much does this bother you? How much distress does it cause? And if it's above, say, a 4 or a 5, make that something to address more so in therapy before you try to address it with friends.
In the groups that I run, I don't have sort of a taxonomy or anything that I would say, here are some content. What are your thoughts and feelings about this kind of content? But I definitely use the no list, as we call it in the training program, which is sometimes it's called a blacklist or other names depending on which sort of session 0 approaches you're looking at. But this idea is, what is something that you do not want to have happen in the game? And when I'm addressing this, I'm oftentimes asking for triggers. But I'm also asking for, I want to soften that language a little bit too, because if I say, what are your triggers? People will say, I don't have any triggers, depending on how much self-analysis they do, or how much they've been to therapy themselves. But if I say the no list, I just mean what is something you absolutely do not want to have in this game, because I don't know everything that's ever happened to you in your life. So I use the example a lot of like, if in the game your characters were having to escape from a burning building. Oof, that is good Dungeons and Dragons. But if you had in your real life ever been inside a building that was on fire, that might not be good D&D. That might be a reminder of something that was really terrible that happened in your life. And I'm not going to know that. So here's your opportunity to think about those things. And it might be falling off a horse. It might be something that I would say just happens in stories. However, I can be very thoughtful and careful about what kind of content I bring into this game. So if you have that kind of experience, falling off the horse, in a burning house, whatever it might be, put that on your no list and then hand that over to me. I use Google Forms and things like that to still be able to collect that information. And I like to collect it anonymously so that an individual doesn't have to say, here is my particular situation that I want to avoid, because they might not want to disclose that to me also.
Chat brings up the session 0, which is exactly, we're talking about session 0. That initial session that you have with your players to establish rules that you guys want, things that are on your no list, even just like what your players are doing, and do we get along, and just a time to establish the game, and not just the rules of the game, but the social rules of the game that you guys want as players. And I know that that's actually a newer concept too. Sorry, Elizabeth.
Oh no, sorry I cut you off. And I want to remind all of the DMs out there that you are also players, which means that when it comes to boundaries and no lists, you also get a say. If a player comes to you and says, hey, I really want to address my fear of spiders, and you think, oh, I really don't want to do that, like, you're allowed to say that. Don't tell the person they're a terrible person for bringing it up, but it's okay for you to set that boundary and say, oh man, I can see how that would be really helpful for you, but I don't feel comfortable in addressing that in my game right now. Or that's not the kind of game I want to be running right now. You also get a say. So don't forget that.
We had a question in chat about if there are any tools for a DM with ADHD.
All the lists. All of the lists. Also fidget toys.
You said you had ADHD?
Yes.
And I do as well. And I find it interesting because even your training I've met quite a few people that have ADHD who are DMs, and it's totally possible. I mean, there's DM screens that have all the rules and the lists, and I think I have it over here somewhere, but like the story world building with the
for dots.
Yes, thank you.
Or for collaborative world building. Yeah. So this story construction, dots is a story or narrative construction tool we use. I will say that, like, as a DM, I'm often able to concentrate a little bit better than as a player, because I have to be focused on everything that's happening. Whereas if I'm a player, I can kind of sit back and it's easier for me to get distracted. So when I'm playing, I sometimes like do dishes and stuff, and like I have my screen there, and my other, like, these are for social games, obviously, like my friends know that this is happening and this helps me stay focused and engaged, and I just mute myself. Also know your limits around time.
Or paint miniatures. Sorry.
So know your limits around time. I used to play 6-hour games, and I would have to like get up and walk around the room, and I loved that, and I would go get snacks or whatever. But now that we're on digital, I have a pretty hard cap at 2 hours, whether I am playing or DMing, because it starts to not become fun anymore because I'm desperately trying to focus.
Zoom fatigue is real.
It is. It is.
Also with, like, I don't have ADHD, but someone who has like anxiety, I think a lot of what you mentioned are a lot of the tools that you're mentioning are also really helpful, because you start to fidget, or you get distracted, or you start to get overwhelmed, and so having something tactile to help ground you while you are playing as as a player is really helpful, like because you're able to have that tactile physical sensation while also processing what is going on with the game.
Sorry, lost it. I'm going to go to some questions. So I want to specifically address each question, even though I feel like we might have touched on it, but just to make sure that we really take there's, give time. Elizabeth, I know you've worked with veterans, and that was something that was brought up in Discord, was about working with veterans. They have a group that they run themselves where they are the painter, and they bring in mental health professionals to talk about resiliency while they are painting together. But as well as like just talking a little bit about the therapeutic work you've done with veterans.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm not a veteran, but I do work with veterans, and the feedback that we've gotten around a lot of those groups in terms of the things that are particularly powerful. So obviously we're seeing the same kinds of benefits around frustration tolerance and impulse control and communication and conflict resolution. Those are showing up kind of across the board, across populations. Veterans specifically talk a lot about how meaningful it is to be part of a team again. That when you leave the military, you are very much trained under harsh circumstances and potentially dangerous circumstances, which is a great way for your brain to learn things really strongly, but without a lot of nuance. And you learn this particular way of interacting with others and interacting with the world. And that kind of mindset happens regardless of whether or not you experience trauma or have PTSD. And when you shift out of the military, the way that the civilian world exists is different. It can be really hard. It can be really confusing. People don't follow the same kinds of rules, and that transition can be immensely challenging. And so having a semi-structured social space where you know that we're all on the same team and we've got this kind of like framework of rules that allows us to be really creative can be this powerful like piece in creating this safe space. I've also had veterans tell me that being able to engage in D&D games and engage in these combat scenarios, not intentionally, we're not mirroring trauma content in my games. I do not do that. But having those experiences is the closest they've felt to making the connections that they made in combat zones, making the connections that they made in basic training, making the connections that they had with other service members and now veterans. And especially when the challenges around developing trust and feeling like you are important and you matter, having this group where you know that they've got your back when your character is in trouble can be immensely powerful and really, really important. So I found that some of the biggest benefits that vets get is around that community building and that sense of self and that sense of worth. A lot of our vet games have gone on and started their own alumni groups. So for the groups that I've run and the groups that Jared has run, when vets graduate from that group, they will often go on and start their own group that is a social group. And most recently, the groups that I ran, they actually intentionally set their group pre-COVID on a local military installation, which allowed them to recruit not only people who had come from the group, but active duty service members, because they wanted to kind of bridge the gap between active duty and veterans, because that can feel like a really big gulf at times. And then they continued online during COVID. And so that's something that they were able to continue doing. Some of them found like this was a new hobby for them, and others were reestablishing a hobby that they'd kind of lost connection from. So I hope that answers the question.
I want to say that that's like really like heartwarming to hear.
It is. It is. Another question was, a lot of us suffer depression and anxiety, and it makes hard. It wasn't a question, maybe just more like a comment, but I think there's a question underlying it. But a lot of them suffer depression and anxiety. It makes it harder for them to do the art stuff, right? The things that they really enjoy. And I think, yep, I'm there with you. It is harder. And maybe talking a bit about the strategies that help us to dive back in would be a good conversation for us to have when we're feeling blocked.
I have personal experience with this, if it's all right. So something I found is that whenever I'm dealing with other people, I feel much more compelled to work on my creative endeavors. I'm not just stuck in my own head. I'm not just like criticizing myself. And so like that's why a lot of people will doodle or draw while during the middle of a game session of their characters or something that's going on in the game. Or it's even extrapolated to like, before COVID, I had a friend that would come over like once a week, and we would just paint together and put something on the TV to watch and just paint together. Or the reason why I started streaming was because I needed something to get me to paint more often. Before I started streaming, I would paint maybe 3 times a year. And now that I started streaming, I'm streaming 3 times a week. I'm painting 3 times a week. And so I think finding community is a good way to encourage yourself to pursue those creative endeavors, because it gets you out of your head.
So for you, it's been community. I think also I've seen a lot of people use streaming, like to watch a streamer, they will paint, watch along, watch a Twitch streamer who's painting, and then just paint along. I think that helps as well. I think there's also something that we've been talking a lot about, community and groups. But I also think there's validity in solo role-playing games and that aspect. It's not something I'm well versed in, but I do know that there are books, there's modules, there's also board games that are role-playing heavy. I don't know if anyone else has that, because I don't think like this and using this as a coping skill doesn't have to happen in a group setting. But I don't know. I don't have necessarily the knowledge about that. I don't know if any of you did.
So first I'd like to build on that. You said that people will paint along with someone else who's streaming, and that is, I think you get validation back during that, even if you're just lurking. Like having that conversation going on, knowing you can jump in at any time if you choose to, is helpful. As far as solo role-playing games, the closest I've seen for that is 2-people games, unless you get into video games, where you can make like very specific choices about your character and the interactions that you have and choose to have, like having those conversation choices, conversation trees. To me, the most impactful one was actually Dragon Age Origins, because you could choose. There was no real right or wrong choice. It was just a matter of what do you think you should do, and then figuring out the outcomes from that. But as far as just like a tabletop or board game single player, do you have any examples of like what you've seen, like any specifics? Because I'm having a hard time thinking.
Sure. So, like there's 1,000-Year-Old Vampire, for example. It's a book, it's a journal, and you roll through it and you create a story through it. That's a book I own. I haven't had the time to do it though. Itch.io also just came out with a whole set of mental health solo gaming for people where they're home alone and they run through like a rule set and scenarios with dice, and they create, it's world building and story building at the same time. Now I just know these more from the surface because I haven't done any of them. I know parts of our community, however, are involved with that. Okay, but that's something that's out there for people as well.
I appreciate you clarifying.
Yeah, no, but yeah. I wanted to also bring up, because I think there's also the board games as well that have the role-playing board games that have the one-player scenarios. So like Castle Ravenloft, for example, has one-player scenarios. The D&D board game, all the ones with the miniatures and the tiles that you place and stuff like that. So that's also something to do when you are, if you don't have people to play with. That can be therapeutic for yourself. Or autism has been brought up, and we're talking about board games, so I thought maybe we could talk a bit about Critical Core, which, I don't know, it's not really a board game, but it is, I think people think of it as.
What would you like to talk about?
Board game adjacent.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I don't know if our community knows about Critical Core, so maybe if you could talk a bit about that.
Sure. So, as has been talked about before, one of the founders of Game to Grow, and the Game to Grow model is based on 10 years of experience. And one of the things about that Game to Grow has done and does now is trainings, and has done presentations, workshops around the country prior to COVID. And we had experiences where we were training facilitators, training therapists, teaching them about the power and impact of role-playing games. And we had so many therapists. We were even the keynote presenters at the Washington Association of Marriage and Family Therapy, talking to therapists about using role-playing games in their practice. And there were so many therapists that were on board. They were excited about the power of intentionally facilitated role-playing games for insight, growth, and change, but had never played before. They'd never picked up any of the myriad of games, the big names, the small games, it doesn't matter. They'd never played any of them. And our response to that was, well, you should play the game, learn the rules, play the game for, I don't know, 3 to 6 months, really get used to it, but build your comfort level with it, then take that into your friend group, and then, learn how to be a game master. And we realized that what we were hoping that they would do is learn to be a game master, then learn to be a good game master, then learn to be a good game master for a sensitive population, and then be good game master for a sensitive population to achieve outcomes. That was a whole lot of steps that had to go before they could use the life-enriching magic of role-playing games in their lives and in their community. So when in building Critical Core, we wanted to take out so many of those first steps. So Critical Core is designed to be an accessible game, not just for neurodivergent players, but for new facilitators as well. So what is inside the starter set for therapeutic role-playing games is a simplified rule set. That's largely how we modify Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition in order to be more accessible, easier to understand. A lot of 5th edition isn't necessary for a collaborative role play experience. So we took out a lot of the rules. We're using the open gaming license, so it's actually built on 5th edition. We took out things like character creation, because for brand new players, character creation isn't that interesting. We want to jump into the play. So there's 8 character classes. Each one has 5 levels. You can pick and choose as you will. So that is one part of the Critical Core box set, is that basic role play, really accessible game system. And then there's also the facilitator's guide. And as y'all have been in the training program, you know a lot of the stuff that goes in there. We took a lot of the concepts, and you talked about DOTS earlier. That's explained in the facilitator's guide. We talked about Spark at level 2 training. That's in the facilitator's guide. There's a lot of these components that we wanted to disperse to be multipliers out into the world for how to conduct a role-playing game without the full need to go all the way into the therapy, capital T side of things. A parent can run a game for their kids, be they on the spectrum or not on the spectrum, doesn't matter, because intentionally facilitated role-playing games can be good for anyone. And then the third part of the Critical Core starter set, in addition to the Game Master's Guide and the Facilitator's Guide, is the module design. And so that we built, we have 4 or 5 modules coming out eventually with the kit. 3 are included in the physical kit as well, where every single module has encounters splayed out using the DOTS system, where they're also aligned with the core capacities, so that every single encounter is aligned to a real world area of social growth.
That's
And so
really
the idea,
amazing.
yeah, the idea behind Critical Core is to help people with autism or neurodivergence.
So the
Generally.
origin story of Critical Core was to serve the autistic community. So it was an international collaboration between Game to Grow, ICDL, which is the organization behind DIR Floor Time, and McGarry Bowen, which is an ad agency based in Hong Kong. So it was one of their creatives was given a passion project. They wanted to make sure that their creatives get to do things that serve their passions, not just selling sugar water. So they their passion project was to do something to enhance the lives of the autistic community, especially given that individual had an autistic nephew. I wanted to help them have a more safe and supportive social skills program than what they were getting, which was a lot of direct instruction, deficit-based, performance-based social skills program, which we can see from our perspective certainly is a little bit dehumanizing, and can potentially be traumatic for youth on the spectrum. So they approached us originally. So it was kind of perfect timing. We had been this story that I had talked about previously of doing all these trainings, but then still navigating the hurdle of learning how to play role-playing games. So McGarry Bo and Dentsu came to us and said, we have this idea and we think you're the best ones for it. So then we collaborated and put this box together. So because no one at Game to Grow is particularly trained as a graphic designer or knows how to use Adobe Illustrator to make layout happen. So in that context, McGarry Bowen, we have a member on our team, Gavin Chang, who is basically done all the layout for Critical Core, done the art design. We have a project manager, product manager, really came from that collaboration with McGarry Bowen then too. I don't know if I answered your question. That's just the rest of the story.
I want to say that I have heard so many positive stories about parents running games for their kids and seeing them just come to life, specifically in the game world. And I find it so inspirational that you've taken that idea and just run with it.
That's our mission, right? So we have Game to Grow's mission is direct service. We have 130 something youth around the world that come to our direct service, but we also have the training program because we want to not just serve those that we can serve directly. We want other people to be able to bring this to their own communities, whether it be they therapists, educators, or community members. But then we want to go one step farther than that, and we have this sort of Microsoft model. The story of when Bill Gates it was founding Microsoft. They were building computers in their garages or whatever, however this sort of apocryphal story goes. And their vision was, computer on every desk. That was their mantra. That was their goal. And at Game to Grow, we want a game in every household. We want a game in every hospital, a game in every clinic, a game in every school. And Critical Core is how we can get there, because we can't train everybody, every teacher and every therapist around the world as much as we might want to, at least not yet. Maybe someday we will. But Critical Core is the way to go one step farther and really help families play together and not just not just a therapy game, certainly, because there's lots of therapy games that are not fun. They're not really games. They're, mechanical processes through which you might disclose information to each other or something like that. But they're not really harnessing that life-enriching magic of authentic relational social play. So we're really wanting more families to play together, more teachers to play with their students, and more therapists to play with their clients.
And I can
I want
plug
to
that.
say thank you. Thank you for creating something so empowering.
Marvin?
My neurodiverse adolescent group has run one of the critical core modules and thoroughly enjoyed it.
That's awesome. Which one was that?
I can't remember the name of it. It started with skeletons in a tavern.
Yes, the skeletons in the tavern. The skeletons
Please,
in
I
the
wanna play
tavern
that.
start. Yes, in the soup tavern. That's one of
Yes.
the oldest stories, and we told that story, I think, at that PAX South panel that you went to in San Antonio.
So this is a longer question. It has many components, but I'm going to read it, and then because I think it has a lot in there, and I think it applies more to like our daily life, like how can we, in our gaming life, interpersonally, how do people, like not the DM and not in between them, but how can an individual deal with and cope with anxiety? So, as someone who suffers from anxiety and depression, one topic I'd like to see addressed is coping strategies. Sure, I get together with my game group as a stress reliever, but sometimes it's too much noise, people, social pressure, etc. And sometimes it's not enough interaction, especially lately with COVID restrictions. I know anxiety is an issue for others as well. Folks who want to go to a con but find it overwhelming just being in a space with that many people. So, what are some ways that we as individuals can help ourselves become more at ease when that panic sets in? And how do we get ourselves out of that dark mood that makes gaming or painting impossible?
This is a great question, and there are
Uh-huh.
several components in there, and I want to start with just one,
Yes.
which is that like how do I deal with it when things are overwhelming? And obviously in the virtual space, you have a little bit more control. You can like take off your headphones or turn your volume down, or it can be easier to take a step away or turn off your camera if needed. But oftentimes when we're thinking about being able to deal with stressful environments, whether that is external or internal stimuli, so maybe it's a thing happening on my screen or in my environment, or I'm just noticing that my heart is racing really fast, my palms are getting sweaty, I'm starting to feel really anxious. Basic coping and grounding skills are going to be immensely helpful. So one of my favorite grounding exercises is literally look around the room and start naming things or counting things. So I might say, okay, I'm going to count all of the blue things. I'm going to count all of the round things. I'm going to count all of the black things. I'm going to count all of the square things. And doing that is asking the part of your brain that's focused on that kind of rational, logical thought to turn back on a little bit. When we start to get anxious and overwhelmed, our brains were really designed at a time when most of our threats were like, I'm going to get eaten by a mountain lion kind of thing. And so our body responds pretty well to physical threats, but has a hard time when I don't need to run away or hit whatever is stressing me out. So having that counting can help bring things back online, and then practicing deep breathing. So I really like a 4-square breathing technique because it's one number and I don't have to think about it very much. So it's a 4-count breath in, a 4-count hold, a 4-count breath out, and a 4-count hold, and you repeat that. There are tons, like my Fitbit has a breathing exercise, your Apple Watch has a breathing exercise. There are apps like Headspace and Calm that have tons of those breathing exercises. What's really important to remember about coping and grounding mechanisms is they don't work unless they've been practiced because they're a skill. They're not something that is handed to you and then it just happens. They're something that you have to practice over time so that when you're stressed or overwhelmed, you're able to still do that. It's similar to the way that if you were practicing lines for a play, or you were preparing for a sporting match, or you were playing a video game. When you get into a high stress situation, you're not going to be able to use your skills as well unless you've practiced them so much that they become muscle memory. So find a coping skill or a grounding skill that works for you, and then practice it every day. Practice it when it's boring, because that helps your brain learn it.
Just building on what Elizabeth said right there, I think that there's so much of what we think of these things as being cognitive processes, that if I just think harder, then I can make this feeling go away. But it's important to remember, as Elizabeth was saying, that this is a somatic phenomenon. Your body keeps the score, to quote that title of that book. So it's important to process that somatically as well. Utilize your breathing, focus on your heart rate, and then that will help you process that as well. I'm a drama therapist, so I obviously have a lot of focus on the body as well. When we when we go into our heads, right, it's important to come back to the body and utilizing that. Some additional grounding techniques involve touching things. Find 5 things you can touch, 4 things you can smell, 3 things. There's different ways you can bring yourself back into your body, into the present moment. And that is all of those techniques have been personally valuable to me when I'm experiencing that, when I'm getting into my head. All of my, whatever thoughts that might be coming into my head are keeping me from being present and acknowledging what's actually around me. Then it helps me to ground myself with those breathing techniques that Elizabeth spoke about, but also finding things like find something soft, find something that makes a sound when I tap on it, right? There's different ways to bring yourself back into the present moment that are really valuable.
I also think like the bathroom is a nice place to take a break, because if you have social anxiety, the part of the anxiety is, oh my gosh, everyone's looking at me and I'm freaking out. And you can go to the bathroom and knock on that wall and do whatever you need to do. You don't have to go to the bathroom, but take that time. It's a place people will respect. They may check in on you to see if you're okay, which is kind of nice in some ways, but that is a place where you can go that's socially acceptable to take that time out.
I think it's also important to recognize. Oh, sorry, Gika. I was just going to say it's important to recognize that a lot of us have a similar experience, that you are not alone, and just to echo the mantra of take this, it's okay to not be okay, and to acknowledge that, and to, in the right communities, disclose that. I don't like going to conventions where the expo hall is noisy. It causes me to feel very uncomfortable, and I don't want to spend much more time than that. So I'll do a couple of walkthroughs, and I'll tell people that too. Like, I really don't want to go to the expo hall at these conventions. I will look at the map. I'll find where I want to go. I might find the people I want to speak to, and then I will see if they'll meet me outside the expo hall, because I do not like spending much time there. It uses up a lot of my spell slots, to use Marvin's language there too.
Something I wanted to bring up is that it's important to be kind to yourself, because you can forget those things in the moment, even if you've been practicing. It's like you said, it's okay to not be okay. And something I found helpful is, if once I find something that's helpful to me, a tool that's helpful, is to let my friends know, hey, if I'm having a panic attack, remind me of this tool that I find helpful. Because in the moment, your brain can just shut down and you forget everything that you've learned and have been practicing. And it's okay if tools that you try don't work for you. There are a plethora of tools out there that you can utilize. It's just a matter of trying them out and seeing what works best for you, because what you might find works for you is not going to work for someone else. Like for me personally, it's like feeling like I have this like hot cold rice pack that I put around my neck so I can feel the weight of it on my shoulders, or I make myself a warm beverage that I can hold in both hands and feel that different sensation to focus on. or even how I first started that ritual, I would say, to like get my brain into the process of calming down, like, hey, I'm performing this ritual, I'm performing this action that I know is going to a safe space in my head, and creating that safe space for myself. The way I first started learning what those things were that helped me was I approached it as, okay, what did 7-year-old me need? If I am 7 years old right now, this 7-year-old side of myself is freaking out. How do I calm down this 7-year-old? Like, do they need hot chocolate? Do they need a blanket? Like, what is it that, is it splashing cold water on my face? What is it that helps that inner part of yourself that is experiencing the anxiety feel safer, feel like it's being taken care of?
There is an aspect about what to do at a convention. If you want to go to a convention but you know that they're overwhelming, I would suggest looking for a convention that has Take This there.
Yeah.
PAX, all the PAXes have it, and it's an organization that I volunteer for, that Geekette is an ambassador for. I know I've seen all of our names on their clinician list. But it's an organization primarily started out of video games and provides a safe space at these gaming conventions for people to go to, where there are therapists that are staffing it. It's quiet. You only whisper in there. It's like a library, but the library has coloring books and markers, and there are lots of people who go in there to take that break and to talk to someone. The therapists are there, though, not to provide therapy, just to provide support and check in with you and see if you're okay, and if you need resources, to refer you to a professional in the area.
I think one of the things that the AFK rooms that Take This does should highlight is that you are not the only one who is going to feel overwhelmed at a convention. You are not the only one who's going to find this experience stressful. There are some great resources online, and there are great tools for people, some of which have been like co-opted for other reasons. Like, there are some great earplugs. One brand is Loop, but that were originally, some of them were like originally designed for concerts so that you could still hear the music clearly, but you didn't like damage your hearing. But they just dampen the sound, so you can still hear, which is important for, like, safety and communication. But it takes some of the amount of overwhelm off. So there are these tools and strategies, and some of what you may be doing is practicing getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. The more that you practice coping strategies, the more that you have these experiences, the more that you're going to walk into a crowded room and say, okay, I'm feeling uncomfortable. Can I check in with myself and see where I am at my discomfort? Is this I can tolerate this? Is this I should only probably spend about 2 more minutes here? Or is this the level of discomfort that I should probably leave now and practice some grounding or some deep breathing, so that I'm less likely to get to a point, that kind of point of no return, that point where I'm probably going to have a panic attack and need to spend 30 minutes dealing with that.
I can second using the earplugs that are intended for going to concerts, because you can still hear what's going on around you. It just lowers the volume, so you're not like as overwhelmed. It knocks down those decibels. You're not getting all of that constant noise. You're still able to participate in conversations, and most of them are very unobtrusive. A lot of people can't even tell that you're wearing them.
I think they're also so common now that, like, even if people notice, they're going to be like, oh, it's a loud convention space.
Yeah, it's being normalized, which I think is very important.
Mm-hmm.
There was also something that I saw at a convention, originally the OrcaCon, which is a convention based here in the Seattle area, that had a clothespin you put on your lanyard. There was either red, green, or yellow. And that was a fantastic way to let people know whether you're someone who wants to be approached, doesn't want to be approached, wants space, and they had oh, you have one. So, or when it was you have a pin, right? So originally it was
this is yes,
it was a
talk to me.
it was originally a
That's
clothespin.
amazing.
It was
Yes.
you got a clothespin when you first when you got your lanyard, and it evolved into these pins. And this is just a really a shorthand way to let people know. And if you are someone who is there looking to build community and want to make friends, the green one says, "Talk to me." Compliment my cool geek shirt that I'm wearing. All of these things that some of us go to gaming conventions to get, but not everybody does. So that green button says, "Please invite me to conversation." Yellow is, ask first before addressing me, those kinds of things. And red is, "Please give me space." And I think that a comfort level that we have where, and people make mistakes, obviously, because I see someone with that shirt that I think is super, super cool. It might come out of my mouth first that I love your shirt, and then I see the yellow or the red, and then I can acknowledge that and give them more space. So we're human, but it's a really nice way to make it normal to have boundaries.
And I've taken these to other conventions, which has been great.
One of the important things about these coping skills that we've been talking about is that it's all about how to be kind to yourself. And I think we need to focus on that, is how can I be kind to myself in these situations that might be overwhelming?
We need to start wrapping up, but there was one last question that we really haven't addressed. It's a hard one to address because we ourselves are all going through this right now, which is sometimes even the interactions that we have online with our friends are not enough. And what do we do about that?
I got a dog. That's not like a good answer for everyone. It's not the only reason I got a dog, but yeah, I've really struggled the last year. I'm from Texas and I live in Washington, and obviously I'm not traveling to see my family. And even if I was near my family, I would only be seeing them outside in masks far apart. But it's hard. Online connections are real connections and are real friends, and it is very different than getting to sit across from someone or give them a hug. It's hard.
It's definitely been a learning experience, and time to just figure out new coping mechanisms, really, and being patient with myself as I try to navigate this.
Yeah, and
So
Elizabeth said earlier, recognizing that we are all in this together and we're all going through this.
And it's going to impact people differently. My husband is also a psychologist with Game to Grow, and we have different social needs. The way that the pandemic hits us at times, we're both struggling, and there are times in which one of us is struggling more because of particular contextual factors. And so we are in this together, and if your struggle looks or feels different than someone else's struggle, that doesn't make it less valid.
Elizabeth got a dog, and I just ask her for pictures of her dog all the time. Because I'm not in a place where I can have a dog, but Elizabeth can have a dog, and I am not embarrassed to say, "Elizabeth, send me pictures of your dog."
I do.
I have a parrot. I have a parrot who tells me he loves me, and you're a sweetie.
Aww.
And you're so pretty, and it's just wonderful.
Oh.
Unfortunately, we have to wrap things up, but Reaper Miniatures gave us 2 hours, and Justin said, he said, how long do you think you need? And he's like, 2 hours, right? I'm all, we'll be good with an hour. He's all, 2 hours, right? He was wanted us to speak for 2 hours, and I understand why, because there's so much to talk about. And this is a big topic and an important topic, not just to Reaper Miniatures, but to all of us. And I'd like you to keep the conversation going. I think if we could put some Discords out there, because Game to Grow has a Discord, Nightheart Gaming has a Discord. Geekette, do you have Discord?
There is a public Take This Discord that
Okay.
you can join.
And so those are great places as well to get a community going that meets regularly, that has that one-on-one contact. I'd like for everybody also to just kind of talk about where they can find you. And I'm going to be in the chat shouting you out. And there's also a resource area in Discord under our mental health panel sub-channel that's a full thingamajig that has a lot of resources, including things like neurodivergence. What do you do with neurodivergence? So motor disabilities, things like that. Some ideas for players and people. Okay.
Mhm.
Adam.
So you can find me on Twitter at Sparks for Sharks, but you probably want to find more information about Game to Grow. So I would suggest you follow at Game to Grow. It's Game to Grow. And then if you want to learn more about our training program, gametogrow.org/training. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, so I would encourage you to visit gametogrow.org/support if you'd like to change your Amazon to Amazon Smile. We just got a nice big chunk of change from them today, so I'm currently very excited about people buying stuff on Amazon Smile instead of Amazon.com if you're an Amazon shopper. But you can also just join our newsletter at gametogrow.org/newsletter to stay informed about groups, about training opportunities, about you name it. If there's stuff going on in the Game to Grow-niverse, you can find out about it there.
I will jump in next.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Oh, no. I was trying to be polite and let someone else speak.
Okay.
You can find me on Twitch every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 4 p.m. Central Time, which is Giggling Geekette. You can also find me on Instagram or Twitter at Geekette Studio. I believe it's Geekette_studio. But mostly you can find me on Twitch. And everyone is welcome. And I love seeing what people have been working on in their miniatures and stuff like that.
Elizabeth.
Thanks. So I'm not super active on Twitter, but you can find me there at Doctors, spelled out with an S, Kilmer, because my husband and I are too lazy for 2 accounts, so we have 1. It's still not very active. I would absolutely recommend following Game to Grow. Again, we have trainings for community members, educators, and mental health professionals. We have a community member training coming up next Saturday, and there's still a couple of spots left. If you have any questions about that, check out our website, but also feel free to email me training@gametogrw.org. Happy to answer any questions there.
Training at Game
to grow, just Game to Grow spelled out .org.
If you use the number instead, it'll
.org,
get
not .com.
Oh,
Go to me.
.com won't go away. That'll bounce back too.
And it's Doctors spelled out, so it's DOCTORS.
Oh my gosh.
It's okay. No worries.
I'm failing at the
If you
shout
follow
outs.
Game to Grow, eventually you will find us.
Yes. Marvin.
Oh, yeah. You can find me, if you're in the Dallas area, clinically at Room for Change in Garland, where I'm an associate therapist. You can find me on Twitter at C, as in counseling, _evolve. And you can find me playing socially on a podcast, Grit and Gearworks, available through Spotify, SoundCloud, and the Apple Podcast.
Okay. I'm Anne. I'm Sidwi in chat. You can find me at Nightheart Gaming. And, how do I shout out while talking?
Typing while talking is very hard.
Oh no, I can't do those things at the same time. Also my practice. Oh, here we go. Awkward pause here. Which is drannwilson.com, and I practice out of Texas. I also am licensed in California. However, I've kind of let that be quiet for right now. And also encourage you to come on over to Nightheart Gaming's Discord. And you will see me again tonight as the camera operator, so you won't physically see me, but you will see my work for Reaper Errant. And then I am DMing Maximum Maidens, which is our all-women DM group, on Sunday from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., which is awesome. I also want to say that Rainbow Mustang? Oh gosh, of course, when I actually need to talk about it. Mustang Art, there we go. Mustang Art, who developed the wheelchair miniature, the battle wheelchairs, will be here for the diversity panel on Sunday night at 5:30 to 6:30, which is extremely exciting. And check out the Discord. I can't emphasize it enough because there are resources, more information about all of us if you need to find us. And thank you guys so much for participating.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Mustang Art is
Absolutely. Thanks for
phenomenal.
having us.
She is a huge support for people with invisible illnesses. She is amazing. You should definitely go check her out.
Are you geeking out, Geekette?
Yes, I am.
All right.
Thank you.
I want to also say thank you to you guys for coming out and doing this, because this is awesome. And it's been great to listen to this for the last 2 hours.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank
All
you.
right.
It's been an honor.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, then I'm going to go ahead and fade us in. And if you want to give everyone a wave, we can do that. Say bye to everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.